Now let's get back to the Moai again for the most interesting question. How were they moved?
These monoliths were moved from the quarry up to 6 miles across uneven terrain without the benefit of large animals or the wheel. It is believed that trees could have been used as posts for rope systems, or as rollers, or levers, to make sleds, or even as tracks that were laid across the island.
The Moai are the stone carvings of the great clan leaders. They are erected usually at the sea coast, and they face inland towards the village as opposed to looking out to sea. As a result, the Moai actually ring the island almost completely. There are a total of officially 887 Moai. Actually, there are more. Many of them are incomplete. Many of them were never erected. Many of them never left the quarry. This next Moai is interesting for two reasons. First of all, it's not erected on the coast. It's inland. It's in bad shape too, but that's neither here nor there. The other thing that makes it interesting is that it has 4 hands. You can see that the hands were sculpted twice. All of the Moai were carved in the same caldera, and that's it there in the background of this particular picture. All of the Moai had to be moved from this caldera, from this quarry site, to various points on the island. So how were the Moai actually made in the quarry? Well, as I said before, the Polynesians had basically a Neolithic technology, and that means they were using stone on stone, a harder stone against a softer stone. The Moai are made of tuff, which is a very soft stone, and they were using basalt to hit it with, which is a very hard stone.
This is a toki.
It's a toki of what?
It's a toki. It's not token, it's a toki.
Basalt.
That's the term they use for it, huh? Basalt. Carving stone. Yeah. Well, you can tell it's been used. Look how damaged it is.
The basalt rock then was used to bash the tuff until the Moai came out of the mother rock, and they left only the keel holding the Moai to the rock, as shown here. This is the same way the Egyptians would have made an obelisk, for example. We're going now into the quarry. Now, we're not allowed to roam around the quarry, and the picture that I want is quite a ways away, so I'm going to have to zoom way out to get it. But there is a Moai still in the quarry, and this one has that keel of rock attaching it to the mother rock. And they have started to bash away at that keel in order to produce several holes through it and then eventually free it. Now, to make sure the thing doesn't come toppling down on people, you put rocks underneath the Moai, and eventually the keel is entirely removed, and the Moai is sitting on loose rock. Once the Moai has been freed from the mother rock, it's a simple matter to move it down the slope into a trench which has been previously prepared for the Moai, and the Moai is erected in that trench, and the back carving on the Moai is done if any is required. Figuring out how they created the Moai is relatively simple because there are so many examples in various stages of construction. But the more important thing is, how did they get them from the quarry to the sites where they were erected?
Roads that begin at the statue quarry at Raraku and go along the south coast. Some go north, some go across the center of the island. These roads were used to move Moai to every corner of the island.
Now, when Europeans asked the Easter Island natives how the Moai got to the platforms, the natives told them that the Moai walked there. And if you were to ask the natives why they still aren't walking there, then the natives would tell you this story. There was a witch who had asked some men to save some lobster for her to eat. But when she got back, all the men had eaten all of the lobster that there was. There wasn't anything left but shells. And she cursed the Moai as a result of that. And because she cursed them, they stopped walking. And if they were on the road at the moment that she cursed them, they fell to the side of the road. And the Moai that were at the platform permanently, and they couldn't move again. Now, Thor Heyerdahl was familiar with this story, and he wanted to know how those Moai were erected, as well as how they were moved. And so he had one of them erected by the local natives using traditional techniques, and they used stones and levers to do that. But moving the Moai, as the original intent was, with a standing up position, was more difficult. They tried scooting it along the ground, twisting it back and forth, but that did damage to the base. Since the base wasn't damaged in the original walking Moai, they must have used something else.
The most recent attempt was when University of California archaeologist Joanne Van Tilburg tried using a wooden sled to move a Moai along wooden rails. It's similar to a traditional method Polynesians used to move canoes out of the water. Ultimately, the experiment worked, and it gained wide acceptance. But not everyone believes the log theory.
It is clear that at least with small and medium-sized Moai, they could have been dragged on sleds the way that the Egyptians would have dragged such stones, or there could have been an A-frame set up that would have moved the Moai forward as if it were walking in a sense, or there could have been a rail system that was used one way or the other. In fact, on the rail system, maybe even the Moai could have been standing up. But the largest Moai might have crushed the wood. Another possibility is that the Moai were standing up and simply rocked back and forth the same way that you would move a refrigerator. The question there is whether or not the largest Moai would have been crushed themselves by the weight against the road. Now there's a big difference between this is the way things might have been and this is the way things were. In order to see whether or not this last system makes sense as the way things were, let's take a look at some of the road Moai. They are different from the Moai that have been erected. The bases have not been trimmed, and the eyes have not been carved.
It's called road Moai. The eyes hadn't been carved yet. They were left as sharp-angled slots. According to Hunt and Lippo's measurements, road Moai were chunkier. Their bases were bigger. Their centers of gravity were lower, kind of like a bowling pin. Most of the road Moai had a D-shaped base, and the base was angled so the statue leaned forward. The statues that made it to the Ahu platform show the difference. The eyes had been carved, their sides had been trimmed, and their center of gravity shifted back and up. They'd been cut so that their bases were no longer angled, but flat. They leaned forward, but not as far as road Moai. They stood more upright, and they lost a little weight. Based on all these differences, the difficulties faced by the Czech engineer Pavel are understandable.
And rocking the Moai back and forth in order to move them along the road did have one major advantage. It would have used less wood.
But the only way to show that the statues could walk is to test the theory. Thinking back to the fallen statues on Easter Island, they remember Moai in transport had sideways V-shaped notches where the eyes should be, a feature that now seems very important.
Perfectly suited for tying a rope around and creating a place that you can put ropes and have friction.
One of the things that we noticed about the road network on Easter Island is that it's remarkably flat, and that may very well help in solving this problem. It is possible that some of the Moai, at least, were moved in an upright position. Once the Moai were moved to the platform, they had to be erected on the platform itself. That was probably not a major problem, however, as Thor Heyerdahl and the folks on Easter Island were able to solve that back in the 1950s using traditional techniques. Now, once the Moai is on the platform, there are only two operations left. The first one is entirely optional, apparently, and that is putting that red cap on top of the Moai. Now, it's difficult to say whether that's actually a hat or whether it's more of a hairdo. The hairdo that the Easter Islanders were using at the time that the Europeans first visited them looked something like this. And it could possibly be that. I assure you, however, that the cap, whatever it is, was not attached to the Moai, and then the Moai and the cap raised together on the platform. Instead, the cap sets on the head purely by gravity and would have fallen off if that had been used. Instead, the cap was rolled up an earthen platform that led up to the top of the head, although not exactly the way that these folks are doing it. I believe what they probably actually did was to put a cylinder up near the top of the head of the Moai and then pull down from the other side. And the poor chap with his back onto the wheel pushing it up the hill, he couldn't possibly have done that. If something had happened, the thing would have rolled down on top of him and crushed him. Instead, he must have been to the side and putting chucks of some kind into the cap as it rolled up the platform. This is the quarry where the red stone caps were created. And it's much closer to the village, Angorora. As a matter of fact, you can see the village from this particular site. And there are a number of caps that are not finished, that are just now leaving the quarry. And so you can see exactly how it was done. This stone cap never made it to the Moai on which it was supposed to sit. But you can tell by looking at it how it was moved. If you take a look at the top center, you'll see an indentation, and that goes all the way around the cap. And that's room enough for 3 or 4 bands of rope winding around the cap. And it was by pulling on that rope that they were able to roll the cap to the Moai. Lastly, eyes are added to the Moai. These eyes may be made out of coral, and only one set of them is actually known to have survived, and only one Moai today has eyes.
Have eyes, and is called also the living face of our ancestor. And the tribe on Easter Island is also called eyes. The word mata mean eyes, but also mean tribe.